I want you to picture the most advanced artificial intelligence systems on the planet right now.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about those massive neural networks, right? The ones with trillions of parameters that can just, ingest the entire history of medical literature in seconds.
Right. The stuff that's fundamentally rewiring our world today.
Exactly. But when you actually look at the foundational code that these world-changing systems are built on, there's this massive paradox.
Yeah, it really doesn't look the way you'd expect.
No, you expect to see, like, the Matrix, right? Cascading walls of encrypted, incomprehensible green text. But instead, the code looks, well, it looks as simple as a middle schooler's English homework.
It's stunningly readable. It's
Yeah.
actually a brilliant contradiction. I mean, you have this towering, incredibly complex machine learning infrastructure,
Hmm.
and the instructions driving it are almost entirely plain English.
Which is wild. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring Python's core architecture today, specifically diving into the underlying engineering that makes this whole paradox possible.
It's a fun one.
Our mission today is to decode a single dense sentence from our sources that basically contains the engineering DNA of the modern tech world.
Let's hear it.
Here it is. Python is a high-level, interpreted, dynamically typed, and object-oriented general-purpose programming language.
Yeah, that sentence usually hits people like a wall of computer science jargon.
It really
Yeah.
does. Okay, let's unpack this. Why did this specific architectural combination create, like, the absolute perfect storm for the AI revolution? Because on the surface, Python looks deceptively simple, almost toy-like.
Right, but underneath, it's operating as a highly sophisticated bridge.
A bridge.
Yeah, it spans the gap between the cold, rigid electrical reality of the hardware and the chaotic, messy thought processes of human beings.
I love that. So to understand how that bridge functions, let's start with the first term in that architectural DNA, high level.
Okay, yeah.
So when we use that term, we're basically defining our distance from the physical machine, right?
Exactly. Think of programming languages as sitting on an abstraction ladder.
Okay.
Down at the very bottom, you're dealing with pure physical reality.
Hmm.
Voltage, electrical signals, transistors flipping.
Right. And then as you step up that ladder, you hit machine code, which is essentially just shouting raw binary commands at the hardware.
Zeros and ones.
Yeah. Take another step up and you get to languages like C or C++. And from our sources, the analogy they use is that coding in C++ is like driving a manual transmission car.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. You aren't just thinking about your destination. You have to manually control the clutch, the gears, and in programming terms, that means manual memory allocation.
Which is an enormous cognitive load.
Yeah.
C++ demands that you, the developer, intimately manage the machine's physical reality. You literally have to carve out the RAM, and then you have to destroy it when you're done.
And if you forget.
If you forget to free up that memory, you get a memory leak, and eventually the entire system just crashes.
Oof. But Python sits at the very top of this abstraction ladder. It acts as an automatic transmission.
Right.
You just press the gas pedal and steer. The language handles all the mechanical complexity underneath.
And the specific mechanism making that abstraction possible is Python's garbage collector. It functions like this, invisible assistant operating entirely in the background.
Invisible assistant. Okay, how does that actually work?
So the primary method it uses is called reference counting.
Okay.
Every single piece of data you create in Python has a hidden counter attached to it. The system meticulously tracks exactly how many times that specific piece of data is being referenced or used by your code.
Right, and then
The exact millisecond that reference count drops to 0, meaning nothing in your program is pointing to that data anymore, the garbage collector steps in and instantly sweeps it out of the memory.
it cleans the kitchen for you,
Exactly. You never even think about it. It dramatically lowers your cognitive load.
allowing you to focus entirely on the problem, not the hardware.
Right.
But, I mean, I've got to push back on this a bit. This level of abstraction cannot possibly be free.
No, of course not.
Having an invisible background process constantly auditing your memory must introduce, some overhead, right?
What's fascinating here is you're hitting on the exact trade-off that defines Python.
Okay.
The cost of this high-level freedom is unpredictable latency.
Right.
Because the garbage collector might just randomly decide to run a cleanup cycle, it periodically pauses execution to clean house.
Wow. Okay.
We are talking about microsecond delays, but they're delays you absolutely cannot predict or control.
Which perfectly explains why you would never use Python for real-time mission-critical systems.
Never.
Like, You aren't writing the flight control software for a fighter jet in Python.
Well,
And you definitely aren't running a car's ABS braking system on it.
yeah.
Because if the garbage collector decides to pause the system to, empty the digital trash at the exact millisecond you slam on the brakes.
That microsecond delay is catastrophic.
Right. But because it accepts that latency, it frees itself from hardware constraints.
Exactly. It doesn't care if it's running on a tiny Raspberry Pi or a massive server farm. It becomes a universal, general-purpose language.
Which means you can use it for a web server or a stock trading bot.
Yeah, the logic is universal.
Okay, so Python distances us from the hardware to keep things easy. But that creates a massive bottleneck.
How so?
Well, if the code is written in this highly abstracted, human-centric way, how does the cold binary hardware actually execute it?
Ah, right.
And that brings us to the second word in our sentence, interpreted.
Right, and to see why that matters, we have to contrast it with traditional compiled languages.
Like C++ again.
Yeah, think about building a massive application in C++ Go. You write thousands of lines of code, and then you hit compile.
And you wait.
And you wait. The compiler is basically translating a massive book. It reads the entire code base from start to finish, maps out all the memory, and creates a single executable file.
Which can take hours sometimes, right?
Oh, absolutely. And if you miss a single semicolon somewhere in chapter 4,
the whole thing crashes.
the compiler throws a fatal error, the build fails, and you have to start the whole process over.
It's super rigid, but the source material compares Python to something totally different. A simultaneous interpreter in an audio broadcast booth.
That's the perfect analogy.
It reads your code line by line, translates it to machine code, and applies it instantly. Zero wait time.
Right. It takes the first line, translates it, executes it, and moves to the next.
But let me play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If you've ever listened to a live simultaneous translation, like at the UN or something, the speaker is constantly pausing, waiting for the translator to catch up.
Yeah.
Doesn't a live translation slow the machine down terribly?
It absolutely slows the machine down. Pure processing speed in Python is much slower than C++ Brum.
Really?
Oh, it's not even a contest. And a big reason for that is the global interpreter lock, or the GIL.
The GIL.
Yeah, because Python is constantly tracking those memory reference counts we just talked about. It has to prevent multiple threads from trying to change a reference count at the exact same time.
Because that would corrupt the memory.
Exactly. So the GIL acts as a strict bouncer. It ensures that only one thread of Python bytecode can execute at a time.
Wait, so even if I have a massive 64-core processor, the GIL restricts Python to a single lane of traffic.
Precisely. But this reveals Python's absolute core philosophy. It happily sacrifices machine speed to skyrocket human speed. It completely eliminates the friction between creativity and execution. You get this hyper-fast, fail-fast iteration loop where you can test ideas instantly.
Which is huge. But to test and iterate quickly, the actual writing of the code needs to be frictionless too. You don't want to be writing a ton of setup code.
No, you don't.
Which brings us to the third term, and honestly the one I find the most confusing, dynamically typed.
This one requires a big mental shift, especially if you're coming from strict languages like Java.
Right. So in a statically typed language, a variable is essentially a physical box, right? If you declare it an integer box, you can only put numbers in it.
Right. The compiler enforces that strictly.
And if you try to put text into that integer box, the compiler rejects it. Now, people often wrongly explain Python by saying its boxes magically shapeshift to hold different things.
Yeah, that is a huge misconception. The sources explicitly state this box analogy is totally wrong for Python.
Really?
Variables in Python aren't boxes at all. They are pointer labels. They are literally Post-it notes.
Oh, I love this. Here's where it gets really interesting. When you write x equals 5 in Python, you aren't putting 5 inside a box.
No.
The number 5 is created independently in memory, and you just stick a Post-it note labeled x on it.
Exactly. It's just a reference tag.
So if you later type x equals merhaba, you don't have a shape-shifting box. You just peel the Post-it off the 5 and stick it on the word merhaba.
Right. The variable is just a sticky label.
Yeah.
And this mechanical reality enables one of Python's most powerful paradigms, which is called duck typing.
Duck typing, like the bird.
Like the bird.
Hmm.
The system doesn't care what the official label or type of the data is. The philosophy is, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck.
That's hilarious.
It just checks if the object the Post-it is currently attached to can perform the requested action. It completely removes the agonizing cognitive load of writing hundreds of lines of type declarations.
Okay, but I'm going to push back on this immense freedom.
Let's hear it.
If I can stick a Post-it note on literally anything, wouldn't a massive project like a million-line e-commerce site just collapse into total chaos?
It definitely could.
Right, like what if I accidentally stick a price Post-it onto a customer's name? Without a compiler to warn me, the system will just crash when they try to check out.
That is a completely valid concern. A purely dynamic language would indeed become a chaotic toy that turns to garbage after like 500 lines.
So how does it survive?
To tame that chaos, you need a robust skeleton. You need boundaries.
Okay.
And that's our final word, object-oriented.
Object-oriented. Okay.
Now, people usually use a house blueprint metaphor for this, but I like the source's analogy much better.
The smart briefcase.
The smart briefcase, exactly. OOP provides encapsulation. It draws a boundary. You create a virtual fence or a locked briefcase.
Okay.
Inside, you put specific data, like a credit card number, and you also lock in the specific methods that process it, like issuing an invoice.
Oh, I see. So my dynamic Post-it notes aren't just blowing around in the wind?
No, they're not.
They are locked safely inside these briefcases. Hundreds of developers can work on the same system because outside chaos can only access the data through official, pre-approved doors.
Exactly, through interfaces. And the crazy thing about Python is literally everything is an object.
Everything. Even just the number 5.
Even the simple number 5 is a massive object with hidden methods behind the scenes. It's all briefcases all the way down.
That is wild. Okay, so we have a language that is high level and dynamically typed, which maximizes human speed and lowers cognitive load.
Right.
Combined with interpreted and object-oriented features, allowing instant prototyping and safe scaling. So what does this all mean for the AI revolution?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to realize that AI and data science aren't traditional software engineering.
What do you mean?
They are empirical trial and error sciences. A data scientist needs to turn a mathematical hypothesis into code in like 5 minutes.
Oh, right.
They have zero time to hunt for memory leaks or wait for compilers. They need to fail fast, tweak the formula, and try again. Python was tailor-made for this human-centric workflow.
But wait, here is the ultimate illusion from our sources. If Python is too slow for ABS breaks, how is it processing trillion-parameter AI models?
Ah, the speed illusion.
Yeah.
Python offloads the heavy lifting. The researcher works in the simple, beautiful Python interface, snapping code together like Lego blocks.
Okay.
But those Legos are actually connecting to heavy-duty C-based libraries like NumPy and TensorFlow.
Which are running at maximum machine speed in the background.
Exactly. The researcher gets the simplicity of Python, but the machine executes with the raw power of C. It's the best of both worlds.
That is incredible. I mean, wrapping up, it's just amazing to marvel at the story told by these 4 words. Python is a masterclass in optimization philosophy.
It really is.
It realized that true engineering brilliance isn't about displaying complex math, but hiding it behind code that reads like simple English. It centered the human, not the machine, and that choice is what accelerated the AI revolution to lightning speed.
It did. But, this raises an important question to leave you with.
Oh.
Throughout this deep dive, we've seen that Python was designed entirely to accommodate the slow, error-prone, organic logic of the human brain.
Right, we slowed the machines down to make our lives easier.
Exactly. But what happens tomorrow? When AI systems start writing their own code, they won't need our Post-it notes or our easy-to-read syntax.
Wow. Yeah.
Will the next generation's most popular programming language remain high-level for us to read? Or will the machines revert to a cold, hyper-fast, low-level chaos of pure logic that we can never understand?
That is terrifying.
Who will write the code of the future, and who will it be for?
That is an amazing thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the architecture of the world around you, and we'll see you next time.